movies.
Okay, and so that to me, I personally have like an argument for why I think the prequels are better.
Yeah.
I think they are better. I think people give them too much diss,
I agree.
It's annoying because I'm like, I don't want to be in the same boat because I'm like, okay, so part of me feels like, well, maybe the only reason I like the prequels is because that's what I grew up with.
Yeah, the nostalgia.
And everybody that didn't like the prequels is because it wasn't what they grew up with.
Right.
And so I'm like, well, maybe I don't like the newer ones because they're not what I grew up with.
Yeah.
What's up, guys? My name's Rhett. This is my friend Jeremy.
What's up?
We're just having a little coffee talk, talking about art, and what makes good art.
Yeah. So yeah, me and Rhett here, we've been discussing what is good art. You know, art in general is such a subjective form of a medium. So we were discussing what is good art. So that's going to be the topic for today. And I guess I'll go ahead and start just because I Googled it and I found this really good, simple definition of it on this website. And it said characteristics of good art. And I think this is a good way to look at it as well. It's either a strong emotional impact on the viewer or a long-lasting, unforgettable impression. It could be both. And that's one of the ways I look at it is now, like, how does this art form make you feel? You know, it's like, I feel like because it is so subjective, you know, it's like, how does this make you feel? How does this make you, like, remember this? You know, like, sometimes we can look back at certain art forms or music or movies, and we remember certain movies or music, and then we don't remember like other music or movies, and we're like, I don't even remember listening to that. So to me, it is more like, how does it make you feel? And the quality. And I liked, when we talked about this earlier, I liked the idea of art and science coming together. That there's these basic formulas that make science and art come together. Like, of course, art is 100% subjective, and what you may like is different what I may like. But there's these general rules of what people follow in art forms, like Da Vinci or something versus a 2-year-old, right? Like, right. Or like we used an example earlier, like a Martin Scorsese, a notable director versus a no-name director with an iPhone in his backyard.
Yeah.
Like, what does he know that you don't? And why is he so popular? And it's like, there's these general rules that people follow that can create their form, but of course their own signature, you know, makes their own art. So yeah, that's something I really appreciate about like good art is like the formula, but then the person's like signature in it, you know, like their own DNA kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's like, I guess there's something that must be distinguishing the art from like a 2-year-old making some like drawing or painting versus like a master painter. And it's like, okay, we're calling this guy a master painter. So what like kind of quality is he bringing to this art form? Yeah. To like actually distinguish the two types of art, right? Yeah. And it's like, yes, and to me it's like I just get so bugged at like, yes, somebody could say they like one better, and it's like that's fine. Like I get that. I'm all about that. And honestly, like a lot of painters are really weird. They paint and like a lot of like what's considered good painting to me, I'm like, that's really weird. So for sure. To me, I also dislike a lot of things. But like to me, what I'm looking at in art is I'm like regardless of how you not necessarily how you feel about it, but more whether you like it or not, regardless of like you liking it or not, there is something distinguishing the quality of what's put out. Yeah. And so that to me is like interested in looking at. And I'm thinking, okay, what about like these different art mediums and what about like each individual artist are they bringing to the table quality wise? Yeah. And maybe that's different amongst every art form. But I think honestly, like what you're labeling those two things, like how it actually like impacts you in the long term, right? Like, and its memorability and its emotional impact. Those are like what this article is like labeling as like these are two things that you can look at to kind of distinguish the quality of art.
Yeah, and I agree, and like I think even like for me, something that almost like, I feel like when what makes it from good art to quote unquote bad art is when it starts losing that DNA and it starts being made like either for profit or like lack of care, lack of trying. Like, you know, sometimes let's say you see a movie and you might be like, wow, these actors are terrible, and or maybe they're quote unquote like phoning it in, and you see these things and you're like, man, like what makes, like why is this so bad, you know? And it's like, and I don't know if it's necessarily the lack of caring, but it's, I feel like sometimes it is that, like sometimes actors like, or directors and whomever like didn't try or like didn't care, or, you know, they say like, oh, I'm just doing it for a paycheck. Or
was it an example of like a bad movie or a bad TV show?
Oh man, it's been, I mean, of course, I think infamously, I feel like one that comes to mind is like the Sharknado movies that became like a meme.
Yeah.
And then they like leaned into the camp, but they were originally like a B movie, and then like the campiness, the cheesiness, all of it was like, oh, people are like liking it because it is so ridiculous and so like not good. But that's where like people talk about guilty pleasures. They like know like a movie is quote unquote not good,
right?
But they like it, you know.
Right, like I'm thinking like rom-coms and stuff.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's like some people, it's like, well, yeah, I know this is crappy, but it's like,
dude,
I can't stop watching it.
I feel that the most recent movie I can think of, I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's the Indian in the Cupboard. It's an old.
I watched it when I was so young.
Dude, yeah, old
it?
Disney movie.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking this movie was like a masterpiece. I rewatched it with my wife, and I'm thinking, man, I'm so bored, and like this movie's not good, but it's like the nostalgia that made me think it was good. And then I watch it, and I was like, this movie's like cheesy and like, and it's a kids movie, so you know it can only, you know, it's kid actors.
It can only be so good. Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like this movie isn't good, but that's just, you know, and of course it's my opinion, and I'm sure some of you guys may love that movie and, you know, have it tattooed on you somewhere. But for me, it's like, I don't know. It wasn't for me now, but I bought it from Walmart's dollar bin, so now we own it. So
yeah, you know what I think of? Which I feel like I would get some debate on pushback. On. I don't know. You might even push back, but
okay.
I think of the most recent Star Wars trilogy, which just blows my mind.
Yeah.
First of all, like 3 different directors, so they do not like synchronize.
We're in the same boat.
They all feel like crazy different, and specifically, I don't know which, you know. And the last one, I feel like episode 9. That one to me was visually striking, like on another level. Yeah, I loved that. But the pacing of it was just like, this is not how you tell a story.
Dude.
It was like this. Literally, you're squeezing what belongs in 5 movies into 1 movie, and it just felt like pow, pow,
and
pow,
coincidence
pow.
After coincidence, like I hate,
it's like nonstop, dude. But before that was. I remember watching episode 7 when it came out and just being like, man, this is really bad. Yeah. This is like really bad. This is like not a good story. It's like the exact same story. Yeah. It's like literally like episode 4 again.
It is, definitely.
I'm like, why is this even, I'm like, could it get any worse than this? And then what 8 came out and I was like, dude, this is literally the worst. Bro. Where is all the money going, man? I'm like, I didn't finish it. I didn't finish it for a year. Dude. Like it was probably a year or 2 later that I went and finally just made myself sit through the whole thing, because I was like, at the point where he like was astral projecting or whatever, I'm like, I'm out. I'm out. This is the most ridiculous thing ever. I'm like, I'm so done with this. I'm like, this is literally the worst. So I think episode 9 was a step up from that one. But it was still just like, man, this is like so fast paced, and I'm just like, so I don't know. I think there's something even to that where it's like, okay, the quality, there's some form of quality that's going into it.
For sure.
People are at the top of their craft, like getting paid to like participate.
And unlimited resources.
Yeah. Seriously. So it's like there's something quality there. Right. But there's something else that we're like arguing as artists that like is wrong. Like there's something qualitatively wrong about that. What do you think that is?
Yeah, I don't know. And I feel the same with the Star Wars movies. Like I liked 7. I thought it was okay. Like it was like if I had a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing, I'd be like, it's a thumbs up. 8 was awful. I remember the movie starting with like a Your Mama joke with Poe Dameron talking to the general. I forget his name. One of the Harry Potter characters, the actor, the ginger. And he says something of the lines of like, it's your mom calling or whatever. And I was like, And I remember thinking, they're not going this way with Star Wars. Like, they can't do that.
Yeah.
Then, of course, it gets more ridiculous. Like, Leia's in space, breathing, like, floating. All of a sudden, she's a Force user, which is fine. And then they just trash Luke and, like, put him on the wayside, make him... It was so bad. And then, and then 9... I agree. The visuals were stunning, like the horses on the starfighter, and like the fighting, and there were some beautiful visuals. But yeah, I feel like I think the biggest idea when it comes to bad art, or when it starts showing its skin, is when you have no idea or no plan, and that really reared its head in those movies.
Okay, and so that to me, I personally have like an argument for why I think the prequels are better.
Yeah.
I think they are better. I think people give them too much diss,
I
it's annoying because I'm like, I don't want to be in the same boat, because I'm like, okay, so part of me feels like, well, maybe the only reason I like the prequels is because that's what I grew up with.
Yeah, the nostalgia.
And everybody that didn't like the prequels is because it wasn't what they grew up with.
Right.
And so I'm like, well, maybe I don't like the newer ones because they're not what I grew up with.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, there's maybe an argument for that, and maybe that's fair. But I personally, like, when I'm looking at episode 1 through 3, which I literally just rewatched it, and I'm like, dude, I see funny, George Lucas bringing his original vision for how the story tied together.
Right.
And I'm like, how could you argue that, like, this is, like, just, like... And not to say that it couldn't be made better. I think absolutely. Definitely. If you would have had maybe more team, more artists, more like feedback, like I think it could have been refined. It could have been made better. But to me, it's like he's bringing his original vision for like the original trilogy. Dude. He's bringing it to fulfillment of how he saw Darth Vader getting there. Yeah. And I'm like, this is pretty cool, man. And like it's pretty good execution of that original vision. So to me, and people give like Jar Jar such hard, and I'm like, okay, first of all, that was for the kids.
Yeah.
And also, he's literally only mostly in the one movie.
Yeah, he's not really in episode 2.
He's not in like the episode 2 that much, or episode 3. So
episode
I'm like, why are people like hating on like they're like he ruined the whole trilogy. I'm like, he doesn't ruin the whole trilogy.
No, he doesn't.
Man. And like he hardly ruins that episode.
I still don't think so.
He's pretty weird. Yeah. And maybe I lost everybody there, but I'll hard hit on like a lot of things, and I do think there's plenty of like flaws and cracks in the prequel trilogy, but I think the biggest thing to me that like makes that a qualitative as a whole, like the trilogy, is that it was George Lucas having a vision from start to finish and executing on that. That's something that the last trilogy it's like does not have. It's like, where on earth were we going from episode 7 to episode 9? And like, why did we end up here? This is so weird.
And you really see that, and like you said, like clearly George Lucas had an idea and a plan. There was even like throughout the decades between them, like he had teased the idea of like Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting to the death kind of situation, and then you have this story of like this of how Anakin became Darth Vader. And like you said, the story was there, like the plan was there, and whether there was failures in it, it's like it happens. I agree. I like the prequels overall. I like, of course, there's mistakes, but I think overall it's a good situation. You see yourself in the new trilogy, and you can tell, and they've kind of admitted this in interviews, that they had no idea what they were doing. Like episode 7, directed by J.J. Abrams, he kind of set the table and is basically a repeat, which was fine. But he set the table and he's like, okay, you guys can take this wherever you go. Episode 8 happens.
And then like which I honestly feel bad for the last guy. Because like maybe the last guy was just like, dude, how do I reel it back in from this? Because episode 8 was just so terrible. Yeah, and then he like oh my gosh.
He does all these things and like, you know, makes Luke's this like emo hermit and all this goofy stuff. All the flack comes from the fan base. Episode 9, they like, JJ, we need you back. You got to fix this. We have a mess. Yeah. Our fan base is divided. Then he comes back and he just throws things at the wall, retcons things, makes it a convenient movie like The Wayfinder and all that stuff. And like, and you can, and basically they've admitted they had no idea what they're doing. They were going movie for movie. And now most people feel divided on the new trilogy. They're like, it's wacky, and the actors didn't like it, and like I don't know if you remember that scene in episode 8, when they go to that gambling planet, and it's like super random. Yeah. And then of course you have this cheesy line where
Yeah, with the weird like animal thing.
Yeah, and
there was a weird B plot where it's like, oh, we saved the animal.
Yeah, and I forget the guy's name. He was the black character in it. The main guy. Finn. Yeah, he's about to sacrifice himself, right? And you're like in episode 8, and he's about to go into like the enemy spaceships and like blow himself up, and then this other girl he just made friends with comes, knocks him out of the way, and she's like. Oh, violence isn't the way, love is the answer, something like that. And it's like so cringy. And then she kisses him, and you're like, what? Like, where did this come from? Like, what is this writing? And you could just tell they had no idea. And I think it's the same with like most mediums. It's like eventually you can tell when they're just like writing or making things for money with no plan. Like they have $1 billion franchise and they're like, let's just make movies, pump them out. And fans don't care, but they do, and it like shows because each movie from episode 7 digressed in money. Ooh, like really? 7 made $2 billion, 8 made like 1.5 or so. The last one made like 1.2. Like there was this decline.
Yeah, which makes sense because I'm like, man, I hated Force Awakens. Yeah, but I went and saw it 5 times in theaters. Yeah, because I was just like, dude, Star Wars. Yeah, and it's like I'm like old enough to like really enjoy this now, so I'm like,
right,
which see that, you know.
Ideally, when you're looking at most things, you want it to go, up, like Fast and Furious. Generally speaking, the franchise has been in an up climb,
and which Star Wars has been too. Yeah, like it was.
Yeah, and then so it's interesting when you see the failures of artists of, like,
and I feel like that honestly, that's like a solid note. Is like I think that with this formula, right, or this like. This kind of like, no, there must be like some form of system to art. Yeah. Right. Because, and what I'm saying is but people say like it's all subjective. It's just about what you feel. Right. Yeah. And I'm thinking like, yeah, part of that's true. Yeah. But also part of it, like no matter what, you will see it in the numbers. Yeah. At some point. If there is something that is qualitatively better and qualitatively more appealing to people. Right. Which some would argue like, okay, well, what if your goal isn't to be more appealing? It's like, well, you're ridiculous. Go draw like a 4-year-old painting, right? Yeah. But if you like want to appeal to people, which most artists do, because the point of art is for it to be like seen and heard mostly, and so at that point, it's like I think you can measure that qualitativeness, like by like the appeal that it actually gets, and so and granted, you can't completely measure it by that, but I think that's a good example of like, okay, with all of the resources in the world, we're making this. But then if people still don't like it, that shows that something's wrong with it. Right. And I think that I feel like to me, that's what I'm always trying to do with my art is find a way to like perfectly kind of balance like, okay, what do I really enjoy as an artist and what do I like really enjoy creating? Yeah. Right. But then at some point I want to actually make it more. I also want to make it as appealing to the masses as possible. So I feel like it's a good place to wrap up. Yeah, definitely, man. So if you have any questions about video production, video editing, you can look at lusivstudios.com or call us, email us. We also do graphic design, web design. So if you have any questions like that, reach out. Yeah. And that's all for today.
Yeah. Good talking with you guys. Bye.